first, I love to start off just grounding the episode, talking about place and our Black identity in said place, because I think that has an impact in terms of how we move through the world. So if you can share with us, where did you grow up? Where are you based right now?
So I grew up in this room. I'm actually in my childhood room. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I was like in out of the city. I was here through high school. I was really grounded in the city, and then I went and left for college. Was in and out throughout my 20s, traveling, going to college, grad school, living in Spain, and then came back to Milwaukee in 2020 in the pandemic. I was a pandemic grad school grad who had no graduation but a global health crisis. So
That was the gift given from the world.
right. So I came home because I studied international social work. That was my master's degree. And obviously going abroad was like a little dicey at that point. So instead of trying to like make it work, like all my jobs were like canceled, like we're not hiring, like we don't know what's going on kind of vibe. I ended up moving back home and getting a job. And through there, I got to know the city as an adult a bit more intimately. I had done a year in AmeriCorps before grad school, and right after I had lived in Spain. So I came back previously, but that was only temporary for that year. And then I went to grad school and thought I was going to go somewhere else after grad school. So yeah, I've experienced Milwaukee as a youth, as a child, as a young adult, now a 30-something adult. So kind of all different stages in and out as I've experienced other things. I've always found my way back home.
I love that. Could you actually talk a little bit more in terms of what did Black Milwaukee feel like for you as a childhood, and then how did that evolve in young adulthood and now in your early 30s?
I think for me, I think when you grow up around Black people, you don't think of it as like a Black Milwaukee. You just think of it as your regular day to day. It was just like, we did these things, we went to these places. I think for me, because neither one of my parents are from Milwaukee, like my mom moved here and my dad followed her. And then I was born here. My older brother was born here. My younger brother was born here. So we're all like first generation Milwaukeean for the most part. So I think because of that, my parents, they divorced when I was young, but both of them had to kind of create their own communities in the city. And so, because when you move somewhere you don't have no family, you got to have some people. And I think through there, they built these little micro Black Milwaukee communities for me in very different ways. My dad was really into sports and he worked in the public school system. So a lot of his friends were like track coaches and athletes. So I had like this athletic version of Black Milwaukee growing up. I was at like track and field games, traveling around the city when I was 3-4 years old, really young, doing all that stuff with him. And then with my mom, she is a Lutheran minister by profession. So I grew up around a lot of Black Lutherans, which I didn't know wasn't a thing. I didn't know being Black and Lutheran was an anomaly because that's who I was around growing up. So I had this little microcosm of Black Lutherans who I was always kind of with at like services or when she was preaching somewhere or events and stuff. I had a lot of variety, which I think is not a narrative that if you Google Milwaukee, you'll probably see. The most segregated city in America is kind of the tagline you often see. And that just wasn't my reality. Like, yes, the city is redlined and segregated for reasons that were outside of Black Milwaukeeans' control. But it didn't mean that we didn't go all over the city. Just because the north side of Milwaukee, where I grew up, is predominantly Black. That's where a lot of the Black population lives. But I was all over the city doing all kind of things. So as a kid, I don't think I was fully conscious of it. And then I kind of grew up and then you kind of learn the history of the city, like in high school. And then young adulthood, I'm going to college, reading about all these cities, which got me interested in Milwaukee. Then I'm back home and I'm seeing things because now I'm older. So now I've experienced more life out the cities. Like, yeah, it is weird that when you cross this line between a Black neighborhood and a white neighborhood, one, that they are racially divided, but also two, that the streets are unpaved on our side of the road and they're paved on the other side of the road. So it became things like that I think I started to understand as an adult that I wasn't really conscious of being a kid because I was like a little Black girl with pigtails who wanted to play double dutch, and be shy around cute boys and read books. That was kind of what I wanted to do. And I think, I don't know, my parents did a really good job of giving me a childhood in a city where I have a lot of friends who were not given that due to how the city has historically not treated Black people. And so the older you get, it puts your childhood into more perspective. Also talking to my parents and hearing about what was going on, around the city at the time. Like, I know I've heard of the gun violence. I've been around the car crashes. Like, so there was always stuff going on, But as a kid, I couldn't contextualize it. And so now as adulthood, I can talk about it, you know, because I had the life experiences. And also because I've educated myself, I've had people who taught me Milwaukee history. I can talk about it at the same time. So it's kind of like a twofold situation now in my 30s, rediscovering the city, I think a little bit every day as an adult.
No, that makes sense. It sounds like you were given a strong sense of community in various ways, whether it was through the church or through athletics as well. And so you experienced it very differently. You also mentioned that your parents are not originally from Milwaukee. So could you talk a little bit more about where their cultural roots are and how that might also have shaped you and your experience in Milwaukee?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because when people think about transplants, like my mom has been in Milwaukee longer than she's been in her hometown of Pittsburgh at this point. I'll be 32 this year. My older brother is 34. Hold on, let me do the math. Okay, she's been here like 37 years, I think, roughly. So somewhere around there, between 35 and 37-ish years. And so I think that's really a unique experience in the city because a lot of people who live in Milwaukee are from here, have roots here. People move away, come back all the time. But for a transplant like her to stay for so long is kind of an anomaly in the city for sure. And I think one that was intentional on her part. I've heard her tell the story of how she was offered higher paying jobs in other cities, but somehow she was moved to come to Milwaukee. You know, for her, it's always about, you know, she's a minister, so she got her, you know, her Black minister voice and whatnot too, which I grew up around. So it was more of this was her purpose. You know, she just felt like she had to be here and she's been here ever since. And I think knowing that's part of her story made me appreciate the city, but more when I got older, when I understood her story, not when I was a kid going through puberty. I had no understanding of that kind of stuff. But I think having parents who weren't from here, because my dad's from St. Louis. And so it was like an East Coast, Midwest mix, you know, it's like a double migration. Like on my dad's side, my grandparents were from Mississippi. And on my mom's side, a lot of our family's in Pittsburgh, but we have roots in Alabama. So they just kept coming more north,
Right.
essentially,
Yes.
as they kind of migrated up. And so I always say I'm like a great granddaughter of the Great Migration because my people kept just sewing north to the coast,
Just
honey.
keep inching further up.
Right, all the way up. You know, I think it's interesting that they settled in Milwaukee, not Chicago, right? Because it's kind of the big city in the Midwest. My mom got offered a job here. She said she'll be here for 3 years. It's been 35 to 37, I forget how many. Oh, yeah, I think having parents that were really rooted in here in the city was really helpful for me to understand the city a bit more. And because my mom was figuring out the city as she was raising kids, you know, and so that also played a role. And my dad has since moved down back south to Texas, but my mom is still here. She's really grounded in community work and just a lot of urban agriculture work and food justice work. So I think that has also shaped my understanding of the city and the history too, because they're both educators in their own right. And that kind of made me interested in the education and research and all that good stuff now as an adult.
I'm curious, what is some of that history that you've dug into that has been surprising to learn about Milwaukee?
I don't know if anything has been necessarily surprising. I just feel like in the scheme of when you think about Black Midwestern cities, people know about, you know, Motown and Detroit. Chicago is Chicago, like one of my favorite cities in the world. And so I think when we think of Milwaukee, people one don't understand there are Black folks here, which I did not know until I left the city. People were surprised I was from Milwaukee, which I'm like, well, regardless, the Great Migration went to all these like different places. So I think it was surprising how much I knew when I learned that other people didn't know stuff about Milwaukee. Like a lot of people in Milwaukee have roots in Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas. I have friends whose families have been here for generations. Growing up, we celebrated Juneteenth like it was already a federal holiday. I didn't know it wasn't a holiday for real for everybody else until I went to college. Because I was like, what y'all mean y'all know what Juneteenth is? I will be talking about Juneteenth. I went to school in Illinois. And I'm like, yeah, well, you know, Juneteenth. They're like, what's Juneteenth? You know, for a Black kid from Milwaukee, everybody know what Juneteenth. Even the white kids know.
Mm.
Brown kids, everyone knows what Juneteenth is if you are in proximity to Black people in the city. So if you like inner city school, they were talking about Juneteenth. So I think that was one of the things too. Just realizing how much history is here. It's been here since like the 70s. So knowing that that wasn't a thing that other cities really celebrated until what 2020 was when it became like a
No, I'm
federal.
That was my case, coming
Yeah.
from Brooklyn, New York. Unfortunately, you heard about Juneteenth, but it really did not become a thing in New York until the last 5 years.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's been around Milwaukee since the 70s. Like, even my mom says she didn't know much about it until she moved here. And so I feel like a lot of what I learned was through her lens. And now I'm kind of getting older, learning about more of the politics of the city. As you know, I'm 30 some years old, and maybe we got some things that need to change around here. So, doing more of that like work in history. I think even now, I was just talking to one of my friends, even the foods that I grew up eating that I didn't realize were like not just Black Milwaukee, but Black Midwestern culture, like catfish and spaghetti, like a really big debate about that. And is it a side dish? Do they go together? And like for me, over here, it belongs on the same plate. I don't know about y'all, but that is the same thing. But like again, those are things that like I was experiencing, but I didn't know were unique to me until obviously you meet other people. There's like, what do you
Right,
mean?
because I'm hearing catfish and spaghetti. I'm like, those two don't go together. But growing up Haitian, what went together was spaghetti and hot dogs or spaghetti and sausage.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for us, like I just had some yesterday. My first of the season, honey. I'm so excited to have some more as the season goes out. But hearing these stories, and obviously a lot of it is rooted in the South, right? A lot of like Black people came from the South. So it just traveled a lot by train and also just by migration to the Midwest. But I think that's been, I guess, to answer your question, that's been the surprising part is just knowing how much people brought culture up here and how much that shaped my experience, even though my parents weren't necessarily from Milwaukee. I am, so I experienced all of these things that my parents didn't experience in their childhoods. And I think from a traveler perspective, it also got me accustomed to being on the road. Some people ask me, how do I sit in the train for 20 hours? I'm like, I've done road trips from Milwaukee to New Orleans, Milwaukee to Pittsburgh, which is like 12 hours. Milwaukee, New Orleans is like 18 plus hours. Milwaukee to St. Louis is 6. Like I've always been on the road because my family's been elsewhere. So I also got accustomed to like knowing the city, but also traveling because of where my parents chose to like raise me away from their like immediate family. So a lot of that also sprinkled into kind of, I guess, who I am now too.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like travel was just built into your DNA really early on.
Yeah, it definitely is. I didn't realize it. Again, people are like, well, how do you sit there? I'm like, the stuff I bring on the train, now we have like podcasts and phones. I had like a SpongeBob SquarePants CD player that I would have like in the back of our Tahoe. I have a lot of brothers, and I grew up primarily as the only girl for most of my childhood. So it was just me and like 4 stinky boys. And so, I had to bring my stuff to stay focused because it was going to irritate me and be passing gas in the back of the Tahoe. So I had my headphones on, I had my book, I had my words. There were just still things, if you watching my content, I still bring with me because that's where I learned it. Those road trips taught me how to eventually, in a lot of ways, ride the train kind of now in my adulthood.
Yes, which we'll definitely dig into that train travel. Since you mentioned your experience with Juneteenth, I was wondering what other moments that would capture Milwaukee in your experience.
And my family, like with the whole travel stuff, we also, as much as I was in Black Milwaukee, I was also not in Black Milwaukee spaces because of the way, my mom was a Lutheran minister. Lutherans, I learned later, were like predominantly white. And so I will be at white churches as much I would be in Black churches. Also, became the older I got, the more cognizant I became of the Black Milwaukee spaces and the non-Black Milwaukee spaces and how the cultural norms were different and how the way I showed up, I don't say it was different, but it was like, oh, my friends aren't here. The faces I'm used to seeing aren't here. And so how do you navigate that? Especially in a state like Wisconsin where Milwaukee is Black, like pretty Black, but the state is not. And so my mom would have other engagements around the state in cities or in the suburbs. A lot of them are predominantly white. That's when it became kind of like, oh, I do live a different experience over here. Even though my mom kind of put us a little bit of everywhere, we were still grounded on the north side, which was Black. So that was not a culture shock, but it was like, like okay, it's different. Y'all act different. Y'all eat different over here. Like, little things that you kind of clock as a kid that you kind of look back on and they're like, oh, that was segregation. That was the redlining, like why I saw the street lights turn on over here and not over there. So I think that kind of also shaped my Black Milwaukee experience. But I saw Black people all the time. So it was just like, no matter where I was outside of the suburbs, I would say, there are Black folks.
I appreciate you sharing that because people don't realize everywhere has Black people, but obviously it occurs in very different degrees in terms of percentages when we're talking about demographics, also in terms of concentrations, which is why I like to dig into cities too, because I think generalizing a state and just being like the Milwaukee experience is the Wisconsin experience is also not appropriate too, because I imagine Madison, Wisconsin, for example, was probably a very different Black experience than the Milwaukee experience.
It is. It is. And I had a lot of friends because my high school had like a feeder college, like a college where a lot of people went to, and that was UW-Madison. And a lot of them went and were like, yeah, Madison is white, you know? And so it was culture shock. Madison's only like an hour away or so not far, but it is a different kind of experience that I actually don't know a lot of Black folks from Madison. I met a few through my previous job on different projects. We did some work in Dane County, which is like the Madison area, but yeah, it's a very different kind of experience. So to your point, people definitely can't generalize states because there are pockets of us in like Kenosha and Racine. There's pockets all over, really primarily southeastern Wisconsin, but I've been to northern Wisconsin. I saw some Black folks. I'm like, what y'all doing up here? How is it up here? What's the vibe? You know? And so I think that's kind of, to your earlier question, the biggest difference between being a child in Milwaukee or like a child in Wisconsin and an adult is like I'm able to have like the freedom to go find all of these experiences and connect with people in a way that obviously when I was a kid, I wasn't thinking about that. I wanted to just be a kid.
You were just trying to be outside. Basically. But now you have language, you also have historical context too as you navigate Milwaukee or around Wisconsin.
Yeah, you see it a lot more. I think I credit a lot of that too because I did my AmeriCorps year here. It was like 2 years after I graduated undergrad. So I graduated, I went to school in Illinois, graduated from there, went to Spain for a year and came back and worked at Girl Scouts of Wisconsin Southeast. And through that program called Public Allies, I got a lot of the language and history that like I had seen, but I didn't know there was like words in like my young adulthood to really talk about what I was seeing. And I got to learn the city for the first time as an adult during that era when I was like 22-ish or so. And then to come back, a few years later, I really got to know more of the history in the process. Because again, you don't really have the historical context. For real, you can sense something is going on or something's happening. Why is it that when I can only take the bus up to a certain point and then, I cross the bridge and the whole bus demographic changed from Black people to white people? Like I didn't have the language to describe what that was, when I was a kid. So yeah, it definitely changes as you get older.
Speaking of language, if you had to describe Black Milwaukee in 3 words, what would it be and why?
It's so hard. I think we are unserious in the sense we always don't crack a joke. I think it's a very looking culture, or I don't know if they still say ribbon culture, like talking about people that's kind of what it is. And I say unserious because if you know the history of the city, of the redlining, of segregation, folks need to laugh. Folks need to find joy in the midst of all of it. And so the joking, that's how it is. And that's like a big part of the city, especially even like our music culture. One of the rappers here, before Frank, he got most famous because he used like Dora the Explorer in a rap song, so it's just
Man.
We got jokes, like we're unserious, so like laugh with us because if you don't laugh, you're gonna be struggling, and so I think that's one of the main words. Okay, I'm gonna cheat with the second one. It's technically a phrase we say.
Okay.
And it's on what? So ON space WHAT. And I did not realize I say this a lot until people say, girl, what does that mean? And there's actually a really great documentary called The Heartland that came out a few years ago that talks about this. One of my homegirls, Radea, is on there explaining it perfectly. So I'm not going to try to replicate what she says. But on what is a phrase we say, and it has multiple connotations. So Dr. Franny, if you tell me, oh, so-and-so got pregnant, on what? You tell me, you're like Sojourner, so-and-so died. Dang, on what? It's like it has varying like categories of understanding based on the context of what it is. So when I think of Black Milwaukee, I always think of that phrase because apparently other people don't say it.
I definitely don't say that. So.
It's very much Milwaukee culture, but it's like, oh, you graduated, period. On what? Like it can be positive, negative, vicious. Like it has a lot of different things. So that's my second word, technically. And then I would say my third word to describe Milwaukee. Oh, it was the hardest question to think about, to be honest. I don't like the word resilient because I feel like people use that with Black folks way too much to make us justify bad living conditions. So I will say, I guess persevering instead of resilience. Like I think in spite of, I wrote a piece a few years ago right after Biden got elected and everyone was thanking, the cities that saved America. It was from Time Out. And I said it's really hard to love a city that doesn't always love you back. And
Yeah.
so I feel like perseverance is a word I would describe Black Milwaukee because in spite of all the other things that we got going on and all the external forces that try to tell us, who we are, who we should be, we keep going. We keep thriving, we keep trying to figure it out. And, not everybody's story is a happy one. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but I do think there is a level of perseverance in the city to keep hoping for something better, and something different to come, for sure.
If you are enjoying learning about the Black experience, explore more on my blog. I share traveling while Black reflections from Vermont to Iceland and beyond, including vibes, safety, and comfort based on my Support Black scorecard. Visit frannythetraveler.com for more.